Hi, my name is Elijah Lucas and this is the first of several tutorial videos designed to teach students about the basics of Logic. Now, this is what is opened when you open a new project. Okay, these are the templates which Logic gives you. Now, if you're a writer or a musician, you go into the Compose section. There are selections of different sort of musical sounds that you want to go for. There's electronic, hip-hop. If you were designing an orchestral piece of music, you'd choose orchestral. There's also a producer section, which if you were putting music on for film or mastering a piece of music, you'd go to one of these presets. For now, well, there's also the Explore section, which explores more of Logic's built-in music, built-in tones and sounds. But we won't choose any of these. We won't choose any of these templates. We'll choose an empty project. Okay, when you open Logic, you are given you have to at the beginning create a new track. Now, for now, we don't really need to do anything with this, so we will create the track, but we won't really do anything with it. It'll open the library on the right-hand side. Now, the library is to choose a sound, preset sound that Logic has built in. For now, we won't even look at that. What we'll do is I'll explain your environment, this screen that you're looking at. So this is your arrange window, and this is your track list. This is your track list, and this is your measures bar. Now, a mixture of these three is what you create your music with. So it's tracks over time. So say I have a track playing here, the needle would cross over the track and play it at that time. So that is essentially what we are going to see on this screen. Okay, so along the bottom we have the pause, play and record buttons, the time of the track, the beats per minute, the time signature, your input and output, and how much power you're drawing. There's also metronome settings and other smaller settings along here that you don't really need to know yet, and the general volume of the program. This along the bottom is all called the transport bar. Along the top we have the toolbar. Now we'll have a closer look at that later. On the far left you see that there is two channel strips, and the inside channel strip is the output of the entirety of the track. So all of the tracks that are unmuted will go through the output, and this is what you'll hear at the end. You can add effects to this later on, but I'll explain that further in another lesson. On the outside track is the outside channel strip is the selected track that you have at that time, whether it be on the mixer or on the track list. Now I'll show you that further by duplicating this and renaming it. I'll name this track 1. Okay, so I have track 1 selected, and the track name at the bottom has changed so that you know that this is the channel strip for track 1. If I select track 2, it will switch to track 2's channel strip. So this is quite an easy way of seeing what each specific track is doing on its channel strip. Now, if you wanted to see all of them, you'd go to your mixer. Now the mixer is on the bottom here. I'll show you how to do what's known as screen sets at a later date, and you'll be able to have a better view of things, especially if you're working on a laptop like me. Now, this is your mixer view. Now, each of the tracks is aligned the same way as it would on the track list. So, if I go down, track 1 is first, track 2 is second. If I was to make a track 3 would be third. You then have your output, which is the output of all the tracks, which is the same as the one here, and from there you can work with mixing or mastering your track, or just getting the general sound correct from the mixer. It's an easier way of running things rather than going selecting each individual track and then changing it here. Next we have the piano roll, which is another environment we will be working with quite a lot, which is a way for the synthesizers in the program to read whatever we want it to play. So, and it runs off something called MIDI data. Now if I write in something, so I'll go to the pencil tool, to bring up that menu, press the escape button. That's another thing for me to explain, and it's worth knowing about. Now, if I was to write in a piece, that's a note, half a beat, like half a bar long. So, play that again. It's quite quiet, so I might bring it up a little bit. And say if I wanted to add in more notes. Okay, so that's a general gist of the piano roll, or like for what we'll be writing our MIDI with. Now, the needle on here is the same as the needle above. It runs at the same point on the environment. So if I am 1 bar in, the needle above will be 1 bar in as well. So, which is rather self-explanatory for those who've used DAWs before, but for those who haven't, that's quite useful to know. Okay, so from here we'll get rid of this. And for this first lesson, we're going to be working with the media section. To get a general gist of using a DAW and getting to know it, the best way to start with is by using loops and just exploring what the software has to offer. So we'll be using Logic's loop library, which you get some loops which come with the software, but I've added some more. Now this is a way of viewing different selections of loops which you have downloaded. Or if you haven't downloaded them, you might have GarageBand, or you probably will have GarageBand. You'll have the Apple loops, and I've added some extra ones as well. So that's a way of narrowing your search. Another one is by your time signature. So I've gone 4/4. Here you have a choice between something that's musical or by FX, which is sounds for sound textures for film or for a radio talk show or whatever you are wanting to do with that. You can do that from here. Along here we have another way of searching for things by moods, and it's a different way of searching rather than the middle button, which is what I like to use. With this one you have you have a selection of these tabs that you can press. Each one will narrow the search. So say I want to choose something acoustic, and then it's quite a large library, so it does take a little bit of time for it to organise itself. Okay, and let's say I choose jazz to narrow the search even more. It comes up with a selection of loops for me to choose from, so I can click one, and it'll give me an example. It will give me an example of what the loop is when I click on it. So I'm going to choose a piece of drum music. That sounds like an interesting drum loop. So to bring that into your track, you just drag it from here onto your arrange window. Now bring it into below the track, so you want it in its own track section. You'll notice that there is a line below it, and that shows that it's going to create a new track when you drop it down. So I drop this in, and I'm going to import the tempo information just to make it a bit easier and so it sounds right. So if I click on here, so this is what it sounds like. Now if I wanted to make this longer but without dragging in more of these, which would make my life a little bit easier. If I bring my cursor to the top of the loop, and then this loop icon appears, if you click there and then drag across, you can drag it to as many loops as desired. I'm going to drag it to just one extra loop, and then I'm going to show you how that works. So that's an example of dragging and looping. Another way of doing it, which is a slightly easier way, you could drag it in again, but another way is by holding the Alt key down and clicking on the icon, and it'll give you a plus hand instead of a normal hand. I'll show you what the normal hand is afterwards. But the plus hand allows you to drag and copy a loop. Now if you were to drag it normally, you don't have the plus on the hand, so that's to know the difference if you're accidentally doing it without realising it. Now if I wanted to loop this so I can work on a full bar section and add more layers to the track, a good way of doing that is creating a loop. Now along the top of here you have this slightly brighter coloured shading. Now if I click that, it will bring up a loop section. So if I play that, it'll bring it back to the beginning. Now if I wanted to move that somewhere else, I can rewrite it. Try not to go the other way because that will omit that section. But if I go this way, it will drag in a new section, and I can move that about however I want it. So that's looping a section. So my task is to add more to this track and only use the loops. For now we'll just use loops, and then later on down the line we'll start working with MIDI and synthesizers. But to start with, we'll just find some interesting sounds. So I'll choose something melodic just to give an example of what will fit together. Okay, so I've found another piece of another sound that I quite like, which might work with this quite well. Now you've got the match, which shows you how well it's going to match with other pieces of music. You also have the key, which is useful for when you're working with lots of different loops. And you also have the tempo information. Now Logic will change it to whatever you've got on here, but it may not be perfect. Now it's with the green icons, they are in MIDI. They're malleable because they're a digital pieces of information, whereas the blue ones are sound waves. Now sound waves are harder to edit and move and stretch and shrink to whatever size is needed to be on the track. So green is better and is more malleable. So I'll drag this in. Okay, so we'll see what this sounds like with our drum piece. Okay, so that's a very simple representation of what the loops will do and how they can work together quite nicely. I'll skip a bit further forward and maybe add a few things and just show you what it can do and how useful it can be. Okay, so I've skipped ahead and I've created something a little bit more elaborate, but nothing too elaborate. And this will just give you a general idea of what you can do with loops. I could go further, but for now I'll just show you this, and then I want you to go away and just work on a track for yourself, just using loops, so you can get used to the software. Okay, so I'll just play this. Okay, so that's just a general idea of what you can be doing with this piece of software, and just with loops. So have fun and work on creating your own track. Send me any links through if you're using the YouTube channel, and write in the comments box about any information that you find a bit confusing, or if there's any anything you want elaborated on in a future video. Okay, thank you very much.